First of all, maybe just another quick thank you for everyone who's joined today, taking the time out of your day to join this webinar. This webinar today really is covering how we would provide some best practices, some templates and guides around digital transformation and specifically around application portfolio management. And it's a bit of a two-parter, really. And we're going to go through a couple of slides initially, just a bit of an overview of myself and the company. And then we're going to jump into ABACUS itself to walk you through some of the capabilities that we have in there as well. I'm very well aware that we have some people on the call today who know about ABACUS and some people who don't. So generally for everyone, it's worth pointing out that ABACUS is our leading enterprise architecture tool. As an organization, Avolution are essentially industry leaders within the EA space. That's through various reports, things like Gartner and Forrester reports, and that really highlight specifically around the Gartner critical capability analysis, how we support different organizations and customers and users through their journey of enterprise architecture, and therefore, of course, things like application portfolio management. There's various support throughout the tool for different frameworks and notations. These are there really just to give you some guidance, some accelerators. You have the standard industry practice frameworks around TOGAF and Archimate, but then we also provide very specific reference models for various industries that you work in, alongside some more, not necessarily niche, but certainly very critical frameworks and reference things like NIST, for example, for cybersecurity teams, or SABSA for cybersecurity teams. They're great resources that you can start using in ABACUS. We're also graph powered. So what that really means is that it's a fully flexible model. So we can make any of the changes and you as end users can make any changes. And really that's going to be supported by the fact that we have offices worldwide as well. So we can help support you through our services team, our support team globally. So that's Avolution and ABACUS. Myself, I'm Andrew Luthwaite. I'm the pre-sales lead at Avolution. So really, I want to walk you through some of the core capabilities within the tool today, and really see if you have any questions towards the end on things that you might want to cover in the next sessions that we do, or of course, any questions on the content that we cover today. Now, there are some common challenges and concerns that we've found, and of course, industry experts and leaders have found around application portfolio management. Unsurprisingly, I'm going to say every single organization we deal with goes through the use case, if we want to call it that, of application portfolio management or application transformation or rationalization. Really, how do we get a hold of the things that our organization is using and what they're using them for? So really, when we think about the number of applications that organizations have, 20% of those really probably aren't that necessary. You know, many organizations go through this portfolio management stage to understand what they have, hopefully to reveal some kind of shadow IT that might be going on behind the scenes, and really start looking at how they can make changes across that application portfolio. The biggest, I guess, scope here as well is where we have applications that are providing the same functionality or potentially supporting the same processes and capabilities. This is quite common when we work with global organizations who might have some kind of global reference model or approved list of apps, and there may be local differences across the globe as well. And there's some significant kind of win opportunities, hopefully, in that area as well, where we can really start seeing what those applications are serving and how we can start rationalizing those going forward. Now, previous webinars we've done on this really drill down into what we've classified as the 4 steps for transformation, or really around application portfolio management. And that's really capture, maintain, analyze, and optimize. It's generic terminology that we would really apply to many organizations across different use cases, whether it's capability modeling or process engineering or data modeling. These are 4 common steps. We want to capture the information that we have, wherever that is. We want to be able to maintain that within ABACUS and potentially other systems as well. We want to run some kind of analysis against that portfolio to understand where we can make some strategic decisions and some changes. And then really this optimization approach, it isn't really an end to these types of programs. We're continually optimizing the analysis we're providing, the suggestions we're providing, and really continuously looking at how we can improve going forward. It's worth pointing out, maybe on the analysis side, and something we'll cover in a few minutes as well, is of course most organizations have different ways of measuring things. So specific KPIs around cost, maybe maintainability, maybe we're looking at security. Most organizations, again, we deal with, and inherently, I would suspect everyone on the call is looking to reduce costs, but there are trade-offs, and that's something we're going to talk about today and how we can start optimizing some of these areas as well. Now, the agenda really is now just to cover off what I want to go through from a tooling perspective. So I'm going to jump into ABACUS and really cover off how we can get started with APM, how we might support organizations through different templates and use cases. We'll look at how best we might capture and maintain that information, how we can start building portfolio views and dashboards to tell stories about that data. We'll look at some of the automations and algorithms we can use out of the box to calculate costs and how that can also lend itself for essentially recommending a tolerate, invest, migrate, eliminate score, or something like a 6R framework that we might want to go through as well. So we'll jump into the demonstration. And once we cover this off, we should have time at the end for some questions and maybe just a quick overview of the things we've covered today as well. So now we're in ABACUS. ABACUS really is an environment where we can create different dashboards. This dashboard is one of the templates that we provide specifically for users who want to start with APM. And it really helps guide users through that initial capture, maintain, analyze, optimize stage. So really what we think of when we work with customers is when we want to get started, we really look at how we can get data input from application managers. And from a portfolio perspective, we can start capturing and maintaining this data directly in ABACUS through these catalogs or lists of information. Most organizations we work with have data outside of ABACUS initially. This could be Excel spreadsheets, Google Sheets, it could be ServiceNow, it could be other CMDBs that they're utilizing. And ideally, what we want to do is build the single source of truth in ABACUS and connect those data sources together. So we'd be supporting things like imports from Excel spreadsheets and Google Sheets. We have integrations to tools like ServiceNow and specifically ServiceNow and other CMDBs. We also have a REST API in ABACUS, which can be really useful for automatically pulling data into the tool. And we support common formats like BPMN, XML, and Archimate if you wanted to import from existing tools as well. Now, what we're really looking at is a list or portfolio of applications. And each of these applications have a number of different properties or attributes. Now, again, this can be fully customized, but this is an out-of-the-box template. So treat this as just a way to get started, and then you could build upon this going forward. And I'm just going to pick on a couple of these just to give some context. So first of all, if we think of something like a criticality score, really when we think of the criticality of an application, we could be populating ABACUS with a low, medium, high score. And in fact, you'll see all of these are pretty much low, medium, high, and we'll explain why that is in a few minutes. So we could be choosing drop-down values and users could be maintaining their information. A better approach sometimes for criticality is almost to take a survey-based approach. So we could send surveys in ABACUS to ask users how critical they think Jira is or Microsoft Dynamics 365 is to them. And then we might want to average those across the criticality scores. We've also got important metrics like cost, total cost of ownership, TCO in here. Again, with drop-down values of low, medium, high. One of the reasons we've started with this kind of t-shirt size score for these applications is when we're just starting this type of activity, notoriously, and certainly from my experience, it's quite difficult to get hold of certain values. So if I ask someone how much does an application cost, they might not necessarily know the exact figure. So we really want to make it as easy as possible for them just to say, well, it's low, it's medium or high. And we might want to caveat that with some brackets of what we really mean by those values as well. So treating this as low, medium, high across all of these areas becomes really useful. We would always advocate, if you have the information, put in specific cost values or availability metrics. They're of course going to help some of the decisions that we make later on, and therefore we can get more accurate and more confident in the decisions that we're making as well. So really think of this as both a way to bring data in from other sources, and then users can of course come in and start changing these values and really contributing to these data sets. You'll also notice we have an application manager role in here. It's very important to try and tie some level of ownership to this information. Purely from a reporting perspective and maintenance perspective, we want to know how many applications each of these owners own or use potentially, so that we can start narrowing things down and provide much more tailored and personalized dashboards for those users as well. Two other properties which are always going to be interesting are lifecycle dates. Now, there are two types of lifecycle dates that we think we would want to manage in ABACUS. We have things that you can control. When does this application come into production? And when is it end of life for us internally? Additionally, if we wanted to expand this to other areas, we might think of lifecycle dates such as the technology it uses, end of support dates, or end of vendor dates. Those become really useful. They're technically out of our control, but it allows us to scope some vulnerabilities and security issues that might come up in the future. And if I scroll across slightly further, we'll see these four columns. We have business fit, technical fit, and then time and actual recommendation. Now, if we populate these values, ABACUS can not only use these for calculations, but it can also provide some suggestions. So let's assume that we have a manual data entry from end users. ABACUS can then automatically calculate the business fit and technical fit score based on those inputs from those users. With those in mind, ABACUS can then start suggesting a tolerate, invest, migrate, eliminate score. And this actual recommendation is the recommendation from the architect or the owner. Now, you might think, why do we maintain two of these? Some organizations might merge these, but this is really just to highlight that this automatic suggestion from ABACUS, such as you should be eliminating this application, might not always be the decision we actually want to make. In this case, the architect thinks, nope, we were just going to tolerate this for the time being, and maybe we might eliminate this in the future. So this is just a suggestion. The final recommendation comes from the architect. Now, this is just a list-based view. When we get to the stage of business fit and technical fit, and the criteria, by the way, can also be adjusted. These are algorithms that you can adjust, but once again, we provide these out of the box just to accelerate things from the beginning. We'd usually advocate trying to plot these applications against those values. So those portfolios, think of them as a way to maintain. For stakeholders, they don't really want to be going through a list of applications. They really want to be jumping into these dashboards and instantly identify the highly critical applications that they should be focusing on. Now they can understand some of those applications, which ones they are, how they fit into the organization, the size showing the overall cost, and then also we have these colors showing that time recommendation. So it looks like we have a relatively high cost application that we're investing in, a relatively low cost one over here that we're also investing in. So it's worthwhile making sure that these highly critical apps, especially one that we're looking to migrate, doesn't impact maybe too many other areas of the organization, especially if they're highly critical. So plotting these values, using those business fit and technical fit scores is going to be a really useful way of anyone jumping into these portfolios and running through that type of analysis and filtering. Now, when I say anyone, we really do mean that. So anyone who wants to edit the content in ABACUS, there's a separate license for that. But generally speaking, ABACUS Enterprise can be available to anyone within the team. So it's based off single sign-on, which means anyone who accesses this URL within your team will automatically be given access to this data set. Behind the scenes, of course, there's a permissions model. Maybe I don't want to show cost or IP addresses and things like that. But in theory, you could have as many viewers as you like in here contributing to this data set as well. So these portfolios, like I've said, are a great place really for stakeholders to start looking at the charts, applying the filters, and then understanding what decisions we're making. One of the next stages, and potentially maybe a final stage if we think about it from an APM perspective, is how are we actually using these lifecycle dates to build some kind of roadmap or Gantt chart, specifically in this case, looking at those applications. And again, when we think of change that's happening and how we're driving digital transformation, we really want to understand the end of life dates and into production dates for these apps, because we want to see where potentially there's going to be a big impact of many applications reaching end of life or many new applications coming into production that might increase the workload or complexity of the organization as well. So these roadmaps become really useful for really just looking at the application dates. But in a few minutes, I'll expand on this and show some other potential options you have for these Gantt charts, and specifically other data sets as well. So tolerate, invest, migrate, eliminate is really a good place to start. It's a relatively standard industry best practice way of really analyzing an application portfolio. When it comes to an actual migration strategy, what you might also want to deploy is the 6R approach. So this again has some similarity in terms of retaining or retiring something, but specifically for things like cloud migration projects, specifically around digital transformation, this is really where we can be quite specific. Are we repurchasing something, which means we probably want to look at the cost savings or the increase in cost from new systems? Are we just kind of rehosting, kind of a lift and shift approach? Are we re-architecting the entire system, which might not always be an option, of course, for some of the out-of-the-box COTS products we're using? So this kind of migration strategy, this 6R approach, is going to be really useful for being much more specific and tailored around the decisions you want to make. Again, customizing these lists, color codes, providing some recommendations and descriptions around this data is really where some of the main benefits come from every user coming into Abacus to analyze this information. Now, so far, unsurprisingly, I guess we've focused specifically on applications. In reality, when it comes to digital transformation, application portfolio management, or application rationalization, applications are just one part of that puzzle. So of course, we want to know which apps we have, specific values around cost and recommendations. But once we know that information, we really want to see, well, how does that affect other parts of the business? One suggestion is to take the approach of pulling those applications up to a capability level. So what we see here are 3 different types of capabilities: data analytics, collaboration and productivity, and sales management. And within each of these capabilities, we have the applications that we're currently using. And then we also have a criticality score in here as well. So the criticality on these applications is high. We have a status that we want to migrate. So we're using that tolerate, invest, migrate, eliminate status once more in these views. The benefit of doing this is now we can quickly see where we have maybe too many applications supporting a single capability. For example, do we really need Google Workspace and Office 365 and Slack and Teams as productivity tools? We probably don't. So we probably could look at retiring some of these or merging some of these in terms of functionality. We probably don't need Databricks, Tableau, and MicroStrategy as maybe business intelligence tools in here either. Arguably, what's happening is we have specific users maybe downloading applications, using them for their own reasons and purpose. We maybe have different local or regional changes that are happening, and they have their own applications they use. This is one of the best ways of identifying that crossover or duplication, and then trying to rationalize that going forward. So from a pure application perspective, it's great to see that information. Mapping this back to a capability level provides even more insights. That means we can actually start making some decisions going forward. What we're seeing at the bottom is a list of those capabilities, a description, what kind of tier that's in. We have the application showing once more with their specific properties, so these colored markers. And then we also have two more columns in here, which are just worth thinking about going forward. Purely from an APM perspective, these maybe don't contribute too much to the decisions we make around applications. But what this does show, hopefully, first of all, is a capability's maturity could well be defined by the number of applications or how well those applications are supported. And therefore, that might make these capabilities more mature. So initial capabilities with very little app support, or maybe there's lots of manual processes behind the scenes, could potentially move through these categories as we identify better applications to support them. The number of processes is also an interesting scope to take. First of all, processes are really things like the capabilities subcategories. And what we were not going to do today is maybe define what a capability and process is, but really think of the capability as what the organization does and processes how. And if we can see how many processes we're actually needing to support through those capabilities, it might quickly come to the realization that maybe we do need a few more systems or better placed systems to support all of those processes underneath. For many organizations, they're also using ABACUS for business process management as well. They're building their BPMN diagrams in here, tying those tasks and activities to the specific applications or data sets or technologies. Organizations who don't want to get to that level can simply use a count just to identify how many processes are underneath. So again, when we think of APM, we're thinking of that entire life cycle of capturing the information, maintaining it, looking how we can actually analyze and optimize those changes, and tying that back to this capability level is again going to be one of the main areas for differentiation and some strategic decision making. Finally, from an ABACUS perspective, I mentioned at the beginning that this is a dashboarding environment. And hopefully what you'll see in here is ABACUS really is supporting and the entire stack really of all the different domains that people want to use ABACUS for. Whether we're using this for strategic decisions around business motivational models or business modeling canvas, moving into capabilities and operating models, using things like BIAN or APQC or BizBook, through to the functional application levels, which we've quickly talked about today, specifically around applications, all the way into maybe the information and technology and how we might have specific use cases around technical debt or business continuity. These are all specific use cases that can go hand in hand, especially with something like APM as well. So think of ABACUS as really that platform that will connect different data sources, allow you to edit to maintain that information, and then allow you to make some strategic decisions off the back of that as well. Now we're going to quickly come back to the slides because there's one more thing I want to cover just before we get to the Q&A. And this is really just to highlight, I guess, that final dashboard I showed on the APM around road mapping, and also to maybe plug the idea that we have previously done a dedicated session on application roadmaps, where we've defined the 4 styles of road mapping and how organizations can use ABACUS to build not just application roadmaps, but also things like technology roadmaps. And I just wanted to highlight that because I think that's an important part of using APM for digital transformation. It's not doing it really just to understand what we have. It's how do we use that information going forward? And roadmaps really help us get that kind of strategic alignment. What we're trying to achieve, are we trying to reduce costs, improve customer satisfaction, reduce the vulnerabilities or security risks that we have? Let's build a roadmap tailored for those use cases. It also clearly helps on decision making. If we have that information in front of people that anyone can access at any time and start contributing and commenting and collaborating on that, it really helps make ABACUS and that data set more involved in the organization. It feels less like a spreadsheet you have to maintain and more like a live data set that really is contributing to these types of decisions. This final one around communication is something we always advocate more and more these days, which is you really want to make sure that people have access to that information and also access in different ways. Specific stakeholders want to maybe focus on those KPIs. Project managers are more likely interested in the time frames of when things are changing. Technical teams are maybe a bit more interested in some of the integrations or interfaces they have to manage. And all of those teams might be using similar data sets, but they all want different views of that data set, whether it's lists, portfolio views, charts, diagrams, graph views. There are various ways that we might want to surface that information and communicate that across the entire organization as well. Now we have time, thankfully, for questions. I will go to the Q&A and see what's coming up in there. Just before I do that, again, maybe just quickly worth flagging something I briefly mentioned at the start, which is, of course, I've been demoing Abacus today, and hopefully you can see how this can be beneficial and hopefully even this short session. Again, please feel free to reach out so we can demonstrate the benefits that hopefully using an EA tool can bring to the organizations you work in, and really making that much more personalized. I know everyone has different challenges and different use cases that they think EA can help with. So please feel free to reach out. We'll be more than happy to have that discussion with you, show you more parts of Abacus if that's interesting, but even just have that EA kind of high level discussion and see where that can fit into the organization as well. So there's a few questions coming in. So let me jump into that. I can see both coming in the Q&A and the chat, so I'll keep an eye on both of those. So the first one is, do you provide definitions to the columns of the apps in the application rationalization view? What's the criteria users should use to answer the user satisfaction score? Yep, great question. Let me jump back into Abacus and I'll come back into the initial portfolio we were looking at. So a lot of the values that we have in here, when we look at this information, you do have the option in Abacus of providing a description against each of these. We've provided this against some of them. So some maybe the cost properties and availability might have specific descriptions. And certainly from a user satisfaction score, you might want to explain what that really means to the end users who are filling this in. There's a couple of things to keep in mind. First of all, this information could come from external sources. So if you have maybe internal applications and you get users to review those internally, that's great. If you're providing applications or services to end users and you have NPS scores that you want to use, that could then feed into the user satisfaction score as well. What you'll also find is we do have additional surveys specifically around applications that ask specific questions to users around supportability of the app, the future role, do they like using it, do they like the UI, the user experience, and that can all feed into this user satisfaction score as well. So I definitely recommend providing descriptions. You'll find, of course, on some of these areas, if I come to the application roadmap one, we've provided an example of a very lengthy description for the 6-hour approach here to really describe what each of those actually mean. And again, we'd recommend doing that, of course, for any of these attributes that you have, providing some description. In this case, this one's automatically updated by an algorithm in Abacus, so maybe not so useful for the end user. It's like read only and just updated automatically. So another question is, how do you categorize applications that do both collaboration and data analytics? I think that's making reference back to something like this. So again, those applications can just exist in both areas. What we're looking at here is a diagram approach. So we could be modifying this. These are live views. And we could have Slack under productivity and data and analytics, for example. Certainly maybe something like Microsoft Project or Visio arguably might be under here as well. So you could have the same application supporting two different capabilities. So this isn't necessarily just a hierarchy. There are actual relationships behind the scenes, connections in the model. So you can use those to explain where you have a one-to-many. So one application supporting multiple capabilities. That can obviously lead to different discussions. Is that a good thing or a bad thing? You know, some organizations might think it's good that we're reusing applications to support multiple capabilities. Some might not think that if it provides more complexity around the model. But ideally, you can actually start managing that going forward as well. So another question, do you have any suggestions on how best to maintain this information once it's in Abacus? So for example, automations. Yeah, so I mentioned earlier on around the data input slide where we have these values. And I've mentioned APIs and how we can build integrations to other databases and CMDBs. There are two things in Abacus that can be used. The first I've mentioned briefly already, the algorithms. Abacus has the ability to calculate business fit, technical fit, and therefore provide a time suggestion. Not to get too technical on some of the definitions we have in here, but algorithms to us are almost like formulas. We have the same input and always the same output. You can define those formulas yourselves, and we also provide the ability to define those as well. So keep in mind generally that those algorithms are going to be really useful for those specific formulas that you have. Abacus then also has machine learning. So the AI capabilities in Abacus means that it can start using this content and data to provide some suggestions and recommendations going forward. If you'd like a more detailed, let's say, demonstration or kind of demo of that particular capability and the AI features that we're currently working on and the future AI capabilities, please just reach out. We'll be more than happy to walk you through how that can be helped. Really, we kind of see it right now as helping filling in the blanks and using machine learning across the models. In the future, we clearly see that being a pure Ask Abacus chatbot where we can start surfacing questions and views based on user inputs and prompts as well. So reach out and also keep an eye on the things that are coming up very soon. I think we have time maybe just for one more I can see in the actual questions and answer thing here. It's a relatively lengthy question, so I'll go through and answer them briefly. And maybe Kashif, if you wanted to reach out and schedule a specific conversation with us, we can maybe dive into a bit more detail on these. The general theme around the first two is maybe who should maintain this information around application owners and should they be able to add new applications. So in theory, users can come into Abacus to add applications. This conversation usually stems from if you have information already, let's say in ServiceNow, and you're treating that as your master source system, the chances are is you might want to make the ability to add applications in Abacus turned off because you're importing data from ServiceNow as the master. You might argue and say that's also the case for some of these attributes. So cost is read-only because it should only ever be populated from an external source. So you can think of that as a potential approach, especially around the application owners. Should they be maintaining in a master source elsewhere, or does Abacus become the master for this as well? You then might want to understand where those teams are based and who has control over these data sets. But again, that's something we can talk about for both kind of global and regional operations, maybe separately from today. Then there's the question on, well, how often should they be updated? And again, there are different approaches to this, but quite often what we find is applications end up with lifecycle dates that end up as being kind of review dates. So owners are notified maybe 6 months out that they should be reviewing their applications. They can come in and just approve those applications once they've been reviewed. Using those lifecycle dates is going to be a really useful way of maintaining the data. And we'd also recommend using a modified date as well. So each of these applications have a number of different properties, and then they also have when it was created and last modified. So you can treat this last modified as almost like a has this information become stale approach. You might want to filter and sort by this in Abacus, and that can give you a great overview of those applications that really haven't been updated for a number of months, hopefully not years. And that can give you some maybe specific options of which ones to work on. Focus on those older ones first because there's likely an issue with security and vulnerabilities. Those that have been updated very frequently or very near, then those are the ones that are probably going to be more accurate going forward as well. And finally, just to finish off that question, yes, you might want to set up some workflows. Hopefully, as I've mentioned then, review dates coming into Abacus, providing ownership, So you'll be able to even add comments in here as well. So there'll be a comments pane where you can actually allow users to contribute to this data set, not just from a data perspective, but from a collaboration, conversation perspective. Those are all things that we'd love to show you in the near futures as well, and really highlight how Abacus can really help you going forward. I appreciate we've maybe run 5 minutes over, but hopefully what that does do today is give you a great idea of some of the capabilities, some of the benefits of APM in any tool, and hopefully in this case, the benefits of using something like Abacus. I'd highly encourage you all, if you really want to dive deeper into these sessions, reach out, schedule a specific demonstration, reach out to myself or the team here at Avolution. We'll be more than happy to help you, both explaining other use cases, other knock-on effects of APM across other areas around capability management and process management, and really how enterprise architecture tools like Abacus is really going to hopefully simplify, optimize, and really improve how your organization is functioning going forward.